And we are live in New Orleans. You're looking at Manning's Restaurant. Just a few shots down from the dome, and we're ready for action here as we get ready for the quarterfinals. And a new co-host since we last saw you, Brooks Austin, has joined us on site. We wish everyone Happy New Year a little bit early, but we'll be here for a couple of days, and we thank you very much for being a part of it all as we get you ready for Sugar Bowl, the Peach Bowl, and pretty much every other bowl game that is going on. Many guests will be dropping by, and Brooks, good to see you. I hope you had a good Christmas, and welcome to New Orleans.
Yeah, no doubt. My son's reaching that age, Paul, where he understands that Christmas is tied to gifts. So it was a super exciting time around the Austin household, for sure.
Well, at some point he'll get older and realize he has to give them, and then the fun will end. But it's great to see you. It's great to have everyone back after a few days dark for the holidays. We're here through the Sugar Bowl, and then get you ready for whatever is to come. So let's talk about the Dogs. They met the media earlier, different circumstances than when we saw you at the SEC championship game, namely at quarterback. Give us your view of where we are and what it all means.
I think everybody's really curious what this offense is now going to look like with Gunnar Stockton. I think everyone expects his legs to be involved, Paul. Everyone expects this guy, dual threat. Maybe we're going to get him an opportunity to involve the quarterback run. I think what people need to understand about Gunnar Stockton, though, is that this is not some super twitchy elite athlete. This is a tough physical football player. His running is going to come after contact, Paul. It's not some explosive guy. So if you're going into this football game expecting Georgia to create explosive plays with Gunnar's legs, maybe not so much, but can they extend drives? Can they move the change in short yardage situations with Gunnar Stockton's legs? I think that's certainly something that they're going to have to lean on in this football game, because he's certainly not as clean of a processor and a passer at this point in his career as even like a Carson Beck was in his first career start. Carson's first year as a starter, Paul, he led the SEC in completion percentage. He completed 73% of his passes. I don't expect that immediate, like, oh my gosh, this guy can read and process everything in this passing offense, but he certainly has an aspect of the offense with his legs.
Brooks, when you look at him on film, I don't know how much of an indicator what we saw in the championship game in Atlanta, because he came off the bench.
Yeah.
We've heard it. I talked to Jalen Walker. We heard Kirby say it. Everybody seemed to rise to the occasion. This is different, though. This is 3 weeks to prepare, your first start, only in the biggest game of the year against a meaty opponent. When you've watched him over the many years, both as a high school player and what little we have seen here at Georgia, what do you see?
His competitiveness and his it factor, if you will. I have run into a bunch of quarterbacks and covered a bunch of quarterbacks, but the ones whose teammates talk highly about them and most highly about them, those are the ones in college football particularly that tend to have a ton of success early on, right? And just find ways to win. All those cliche things, it still matters in college football, right? You still can have guys that are elite college football players, and then when they get to that NFL level, maybe they're not 6'5", maybe they're not 225, maybe they don't have the ability to make every single throw. I think Gunnar's got all of those it factor qualities that can make him a great college quarterback. It's actually something, Paul, I talked to offensive coordinator Mike Bobo about during media availabilities today. Just asked him, how do you define the it factor? I've always been a guy that defines it, Paul, as when you walk into the huddle, do the other 10 guys feel a sense of confidence around you, and can you elevate their performance? And Mike alluded to that aspect of the it factor, but also talked about the other 80 guys on the sideline. Do they believe in you? Do they have a sense of confidence in you? And it seems like this football team speaks extremely highly of Gunnar Stockton, so they certainly believe in him.
But in terms of the reality, and for everyone to rally around the flag is understandable, but he's still not Carson Beck.
No.
So ultimately, what is the drop-off for the Dogs, if you think there is any?
Yeah, so I don't think you go into a football game with Gunnar Stockton, or even a season. If he were your season starting quarterback, I don't think you go into it thinking, hey, we're going to lead the SEC in passing attempts this year like they did with Carson Beck. So I think you lean more on the run game. But you saw it in the second half against Texas, Paul. The traditional run game from Georgia, the running back carries, right? Trevor Etienne started getting loose in that second half against Texas, who I am of the belief is the best defense in college football right now. So why did that happen? Well, you started seeing backside defenders, defensive ends, linebackers, safeties starting to have to be held responsible by the opportunity or the idea that the quarterback might be keeping the football out of the back of some of these read options. So you started seeing the run game start to elevate a little bit for Georgia, the traditional running back run game, on top of the fact that the quarterback's legs are involved in the system now. But you certainly have a diminishing passing attack with Gunnar Stockton versus Carson Beck, no doubt.
So I've asked you what you see on film, but in the real world of punditry that I live in, it's can Georgia win with him? Can they get through the next round? Can they get to the finals? Because that's really where Georgia is expected to be. They were the favorite when the season began. I realize that that's getting off message here with what you normally do. You study, you try to analyze, but the drop-off is what I'm really curious about, and try to compute it all for us as we look at Notre Dame and then what could be beyond. Yeah,
I mean, this side of the bracket is far more favorable to a Georgia football team that lost their starting quarterback than the other side. The other side's got multiple offenses that you feel like put up 35, 40-plus points. They can run the ball, play defense against this side of the bracket. I feel like they can win a 20-17 football game against Notre Dame.
And that's what you have to do.
You're going to have to. Yeah. There's no doubt about it, Paul. The recipe for success with Gunnar as a first-time starter in this football game is, can we get him to 18 for 24 for 220 and 65 yards rushing and still rush for 250 yards total as an offense? That's the recipe for success right now with a first-time starter and Gunnar. And this side of the bracket is far more favorable to that. If they would have bumped up into an Oregon round 2 or an Ohio State round 1, I would go into that feeling really, really suspect about their ability to win a shootout. I don't think they're going to go into the playoff with a recipe needing to do that, though, on this side of the bracket.
We're talking to Brooks Austin about the reality of Georgia starting the playoffs, really, essentially. They are starting the playoffs. They were not in the first round with someone who getting all the right signals, all the right Kirby's saying today, all of the players, they play hard for him. I mean, what does that mean? I mean, they're going to play hard for Carson Beck. They're going to play hard for you if you end up being the quarterback. I'm just trying to figure out whether it's going to be enough. Because Notre Dame is a tough football team. I don't know if they're an elite team, but they certainly they do a lot of good things.
Player to player, top to bottom. This is a blue chip roster from Notre Dame. Like, I've covered recruiting for 5 years since doing this. Notre Dame's perennially inside the top 12. So this is, like, everyone gets into this SEC talent discussion. This is a talented football roster from Notre Dame, not as equivalent to Georgia. Georgia perennially inside the top 3, maybe top 5. Sure. So there's a slight difference, but this is still a really talented football team for Notre Dame. If I'm Georgia, the thing that scares me the most about this matchup is that Notre Dame can 100% cover us. They can 100%. These DBs from Notre Dame are legit. They can get after it. Now, the problem when you go play man-to-man coverage against a football team that has a quarterback that can run, you worry about not being able to spy him. You worry about him getting out and running for a bunch of yardage against man-to-man coverage. But I just told you at the start of the show, Gunnar's not some 4.58 runner. It's a 4.8 flat guy if I had to make him run a 40 tomorrow. He's a physical runner. He can extend the chains. So I think Notre Dame's still going to be able to go out and play 90% man-to-man defense, which is what they have done most of this football year, and they have really created problems for offenses that don't have an elite weapon at wide receiver, which we know Georgia does not have right now.
Brooks, away from this game, because I've been interviewed a couple of times over the last 2 or 3 days, and man, it's like, what happened? What's wrong with the SEC? It's SEC piling on time. Wednesday can change that. Certainly, it very likely will. But just your treetop of some of the games we've seen, which the Tennessee game matters.
Yes.
I'm not sure Oklahoma losing on a 2-point conversion. I'm not sure some of those really play a big factor, but a lot of folks are rejoicing at the SEC's expense so far.
In my opinion, we are in a talent acquisition sport, and now we've always been in a who can get the best football players, and most of those have resided in the SEC over the years. But now it's not just a talent acquisition sport, it's a talent salary sport. How much money do you have available to you to go out and get good football players? And where does that money reside? It resides in, like, 30 of the top programs in college football. Now, majority of those reside in the SEC, which is, I think, why you see a lot of these people glean on the talent aspect of the SEC. But, man, the NFL draft numbers don't lie. The national championship numbers don't lie. I think it's undeniable the fact that this conference produces the best talent week in, week out, and best product week in and week out. However, Ohio State still resides and still has a $20 million annual roster. Oregon still has Phil Knight, right? We are in a sport where if you've got money, you've got good football. And there's good football everywhere in this country.
Great stuff from Brooks. I realize we have not talked to you in a couple of days, so we will take your phone calls this afternoon. We have a lot of guests, of course. We do that on location, as you're well aware, and have been kind enough to share those feelings with us. But we will have plenty of time for your phone calls as well. Brooks, thank you. We'll take a short break. A couple more guests are on deck. We are live in New Orleans at Manning's Restaurant. Yes, you recognize the name. They are the royal family of not only this community, but of football in general, and we appreciate their hospitality. As we take a short break, we're back after this.